Good morning. So first, let's just start. We all know Dropbox mainly as consumers. I'm a user. So a lot of people know the free version. What other ways is Dropbox making money and getting into the ecosystem?
Sure. So we have two paid products. There's Dropbox Pro, which is a single license product for $100 a year, €100, and Dropbox Business. We have millions of subscribers for Pro, over 200,000 paying teams for Dropbox Business, and seeing tremendous growth across the board, but in particular in Europe.
What's the money maker for you guys? Where do you have the most revenue coming in right now?
Dennis, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so today, Dropbox Pro, which was our first revenue-producing product, is the larger business, about 2/3 of our revenue, but about 1/3 is coming from Dropbox Business.
This morning, we saw the pound tanking again. It's becoming very clear that Britain is moving toward a hard exit from the European Union. Theresa May, the Prime Minister, signaled that to the press over the weekend, and she's expected to make a speech this Tuesday signaling a hard out. It's looking less and less likely that the UK will be part of the free trade movement. How does that affect an American company like yours?
Yeah, so far, we have not seen any real change in the trajectory of our growth, our user growth. We're adding about 10 million users a month globally, and in the UK, about 1 in 2 connected people uses Dropbox. So, very important market for us. We don't see business growth slowing down, really no change since Brexit was announced. And our expectation is that sensible outcome will prevail in terms of the relationship between the EU and the UK.
Yeah, I mean, what I'd add to that is that, despite some of the protectionist policies that are being enacted in a bunch of countries around the world.
On both sides of the Atlantic?
On both sides of the Atlantic, I think at least in the basic set of users that we have, which are modern knowledge workers, the trend that we see is that companies continue to actually get more global. Teams continue to essentially span boundaries, span countries. And I think one of the really interesting aspects of why Dropbox has grown so much over the last 5 years in terms of businesses is because we allow businesses, essentially to collaborate across borders, across platforms, across operating systems. So I think that we tend to see that collaboration is continuing to increase, regardless of the policies that are being enacted.
So I hear what you're saying, that people are going to keep on using Dropbox no matter what, whether they're part of the European Union or not. But listen, you're charging in pounds, obviously. Those pounds are worth less and less in dollars. So have you had to increase prices, or do you intend to increase prices as the pound continues to fall? We have some estimates that the pound could go as low as $1.10. When I moved to the UK, it was at $1.40 something. That's a big shift.
Yeah, we follow other tech companies, and we do adjust price as the currencies fluctuate. We did adjust last summer for the euro and for the pound. But look, there's going to be volatility in the markets. I think that we're in a time when there's a lot of risk because you do have governments seeking to close down regulation, specifically around the internet, around where data lives, how you treat privacy, all those things. And it's up to us to work with policymakers to come up with sensible answers.
I'll just stay on politics for a little bit more before we shift back more to tech. Trump is just a few days away from being the president. I know a lot of people are still surprised in the United States and especially in Europe. But at the end of the day, what I hear, I was just at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, and what I heard over and over again is tech CEOs, the same group of people who did not support Trump. There was basically about one person who supported Trump in Silicon Valley, Peter Thiel. But what I hear is excitement. And it's off-the-record conversations that I'm having with people. This is not just people projecting because they know Donald Trump is watching and tweeting every single day. But they're excited at the prospect of deregulation. So do you think that there could be any effects on Dropbox, deregulation? It could be good for your business? Or is this outside the things that Donald Trump is talking about?
The way I think of it is that at some point, regardless of, this is the way democracy works, right? Which is like in any system, if you actually have, 50% of people, 49, 51, essentially voting things, it doesn't matter who you voted for. At some point, you have to get along with it, essentially make the best of it. And I am eager to see essentially what the new administration does and basically move forward for the next 4 years.
And on the question of security, I've heard from a lot of people in Silicon Valley Obama basically sided with the tech community when it came to the San Bernardino shooting. The FBI wanted access to the phone, and Barack Obama basically stepped out. So are you worried, given that Donald Trump came out clearly and said that Apple should have given access, and given that you're a company that has files that are important to people, privacy that's important to people, do you worry that Donald Trump, may put his foot down a lot harder?
Well, hopefully he won't single out specific companies, but I think...
But that's what he does.
I understand
I was at Consumer Electronics Show, and he was singling out one company after another.
Which is probably why a lot of the executives were trying to keep their heads down. So.
Yes. I had CEOs...
So I'll do the same.
I had a CEO waking up at 3 a.m. in the morning in Las Vegas because Trump tweets at 6 a.m. from Trump Tower in New York. So they're waking up at 3 a.m. scared that, it's about them. And in fact, it did happen to one of the companies. So you're keeping your head down.
I think that's the right plan right now.
Do companies need to have a social media strategy ready in case Donald Trump tweets about them?
Yeah, I suppose they do. It's crazy, but yes, they probably do. I'm not sure what that strategy would be. I don't think you want to get into a tweet storm with
the president-elect. Yes, I don't think so.
Yeah,
we'll
some
see.
people have, but they haven't fared that well.
No, they have not.
But getting back to Dropbox, you guys are in a period of incredible growth, and you guys have both worked at Google and Facebook, other fast-growing companies. What's the difference when you compare these phases? You worked at Google,
yeah.
So it's kind of the same phase as when you were at Google, where you are now. Dropbox, maybe a little more down the line, but what's similar and what's different about growing a team at this growth?
Yeah, so at Dropbox, we've tripled our employee base, our revenue base in the last 2.5 years. And at Google, so I was at Google in Europe in 2005, and my job was to open up offices in 13 countries. And it was kind of interesting because in 2005, the employer brand for Google was not that well established, and we actually had a very hard time hiring people.
You had a hard time hiring people for Google?
To run like Russia or Poland. And
not a problem for Google anymore. Well,
there were two problems. One, there weren't a lot of people who had experience on the internet in management roles. And people weren't familiar with Google. So that was the challenge then. The challenge now is very different. Tech is hot. People want to be in tech. They want to be associated with tech. There's lots of examples of individuals who've had a great career in technology, but the competition is incredibly intense. So we compete with Airbnb, Uber, Facebook, Google, you name it, for great engineering talent, great marketing talent, and so forth.
How do you attract people to the company? What is the pitch that you make them to pull them away from going to an Uber or to steal them away from an Airbnb?
Yeah, I mean, combining, answer to this question with the previous one. So I joined Facebook when it was pretty small. I joined Facebook when it was about 10 people.
And it was about 10 people.
It was a handful of engineers.
It only had 10 million users then.
And it actually had 700,000 users
wow.
When I joined. And I still remember on the second day that I walked into work, Mark pulled me aside and he's like, hey, you should write a search engine for Facebook. I'm like, what do you mean? I've never written a search engine before. I'm 22 years old. I have no idea how to do this.
For Facebook.
But he's just like, yeah, just go figure it out. I wrote Facebook. Why can't you write a search engine for Facebook? And I think the reason why I find that, that story so compelling is that he trusted me with such a huge problem. And it just motivated me at a super deep level to actually be like, somebody out there is trusting me with this big part of essentially this site. And I think that's the way you basically attract and retain the best engineers, which is, can you point them towards really hard problems and then give them the space to actually go achieve that. And if you can create an environment, a culture that fosters that kind of risk-taking, then I think that the best people tend to stay with you.
So present talent with the biggest problem possible.
Correct. And give them the space to go experiment, potentially to go fail, and to actually trust them to be able to solve it, even if they've never done it before.
So I had a similar experience at Google where we were assigned a task of helping or defining what countries were important for Google to actually have people in. And this is when Google had offices in Western Europe and Japan, and that was it. And we came back and we said, there's 30 countries that are going to be interesting. It'll take us 3 years to get there. And I remember Larry Page saying, you do understand we have searches in 196 countries. So why don't you start with 196, tell us where we can't do business, and that should be your list. So that's the way these guys think about problems. It's global from the beginning.
And does it come down to salary sometimes? Is it just a bidding war with these other companies?
At least in my opinion, I think that most engineers, most people in our companies, they just want to be treated fairly. They want to know that they're getting paid like essentially like a fair market rate for what they're doing. But what ends up attracting and retaining them is about the scale of the problem, right? Because for us, I mean, another good example is like 3 years ago, Drew basically coming to me and Akhil Gupta, our VP of infrastructure, and telling us, hey, can you actually engineer a move away from AWS? Because essentially like going into our own infrastructure would allow us to get much better economies of scale over time.
AWS, of course, Amazon.
Correct. And at that point, it was a pretty insane, preposterous suggestion, which is that we have built our entire business on top of AWS, and now you're proposing that we
That's probably a surprise for a lot of people, thinking that you're a cloud company and you were taking advantage of Amazon's cloud.
I mean, Amazon have historically been great partners for us because they were really how we grew and scaled the business. But when 2 or 3 years ago, Drew challenged us to essentially go off and get onto our own infrastructure, what that meant was that we ended up going to having, to go establish relationships with people in China for essentially our manufacturing relationships. We ended up having to go hire a hardware team, go hire an operating system team. But that's the scale of challenge that makes working at a tech company fun, with like a big vision. Yeah.
You were mentioning, we were talking about fighting for talent, Uber, Airbnb, but who are your direct competitors? Who does
in the market?
Yes, these are direct competitors in the market.
So we compete primarily with Microsoft and with Google. Now, we're also partners with Microsoft and Google in some respects where with Microsoft, for example, it's very easy to use Dropbox if you're using Office. But
so you're frenemies.
So we're frenemies. That's correct.
Correct.
Yeah.
How can you compete with somebody like Google? I have the Google Photos app, unlimited photos. So I don't have to worry about paying Apple for iCloud anymore. All of my photos I can automatically back up in their app. Unlimited storage, no problem whatsoever, no payment whatsoever. How on earth can you compete with Google when they're giving unlimited storage to cheap people like me?
Yeah, so our market is not the consumer who's just trying to find cheap storage, because there's plenty of opportunities there. Our opportunity really is in work and in enabling teams to collaborate on a global basis, across borders, across ecosystems in particular. So for Dropbox, the reason we have 200,000 paying teams, the reason we have millions of paying subscribers for Pro is the product works equally well on iOS, on Android, on Windows. And that's not true for Microsoft or for Google. Their interest really is in keeping you in their ecosystem. So what's really important for us from a strategic standpoint is integrate with everything out there. So we have partnerships with Adobe. We have 3,000 security partners for Dropbox Business. We have hundreds of thousands of developers that write to the Dropbox Business API. So if we're present in any application as an option for saving information, storing information, retrieving information, and sharing that information, then that's a huge advantage for us.
So you kind of see yourself as the WhatsApp of work collaboration as opposed to the BlackBerry Messenger, which was just, in its own ecosystem. You want to be across everything.
I think the analogy is, we're riding this wave of consumerization where people have 1 million applications in their pocket and they can choose what technology they want to bring to work. And the way that we get into business is the 500 million people who use Dropbox run into a business problem at work, and whatever the IT department is giving them is not helping them solve it. So they need to share a large media file for an advertising campaign with their ad agency. And there's no way to do that other than using clunky old technology like FTP, file servers, and the like. So they bring us to work, and then they might buy a Pro license. They might eventually wind up on a Dropbox Business team. We might send a sales team in eventually and develop that account, as we have with like News Corp, into a 20,000 seat account over time. But we believe
Fox News, my competitors.
There you go. Sorry,
just in case you were wondering.
But we also think that model of software is the future. That in the old way was you hire a lot of salespeople and they go talk, they sell top down, and they're selling products that really are designed not so much for the end user. We believe that if you look at Slack or us or Atlassian, a number of these newer companies, individuals are choosing their own software, they're bringing it to work, and that's the future of distribution for software.
Yeah, I think that this really is one of the biggest trends happening in software right now, which is you're seeing a sea change in essentially how software for enterprises is basically built and sold. Because historically, for the last 20 years, you had a model where essentially we were building for the buyer, not for the actual user of the software. So ergo, what you ended up
building maybe for the corporation, but not for the people using it at the corporation.
Exactly, because you had no feedback loop. You would basically basically go to an IT department and you'd convince them at some point to buy your software, to deploy it, but you had no feedback loop with the actual user. So ergo, what did we do for the last 20 years? Well, we built for the IT buyer. Right? We didn't actually build for the end-up user. And the other problem with essentially the old model was that you were essentially, because you were selling shrink-wrap software, you could only take one shot on goal every 2 years, which means that over the course of 20 years, you only release 10 versions of your software. And compare that to a Google or a Facebook or us, we are taking 100 shots on goal every single day by taking like a experimentation-based, like iterative approach. And this is why the software is evolving so much quicker. Compared to like, in the past for enterprise productivity software. So I think that this is one of the biggest trends of our time.
Are there any companies that big companies you work with that we may not know that you can name, or is that all private information?
Big companies meaning?
In the sense that you're servicing those companies, like News Corp you just mentioned.
Yeah, well, I think we have over 200 reference accounts, Spotify, Channel 4 in the UK, Languedere Interactive in France, Under Armour, Expedia, so there's
it's
tons
not
of...
that you're hosting, so like with Spotify, it's not that you're hosting the song files,
no,
right?
No,
it's more about the internal work that they're doing.
Right, so an example, their marketing department, their sales department, they share large files with potential prospects, customers, advertisers, media partners. All the sharing, all the collaboration is done in Dropbox.
We talk about all the benefits of cloud computing, but I was on an airplane on the way over here, and CNN needed me to record my voice for a piece. So I have a little microphone that I carry around that plugs into my iPhone. I went into the bathroom with a blanket on the airplane, went over, cover like that so you can't hear the noise, tracked my piece, and then sent it over Wi-Fi back to a producer in New York, and by the time I had gotten off the airplane, my voice had already aired on CNN. So people think, oh, that's so great, cloud computing, Wi-Fi up in the air, portable microphones, yada, yada, yada. Okay, great, it worked on the airplane. But CNN has also called me up at 2 a.m. in the morning because they know I have the microphone and they need a piece retracked or something's happening on Eastern time and I live in UK time. So my point in saying all of this is we talk about how amazing the cloud is, how it can allow you to work from anywhere, including the bathroom on an airplane or when you're asleep in London on Eastern time. So where do you guys see these products as pluses and minuses, both because you guys are creating them and we're using them? Somebody can send me a file from CNN via Dropbox and I can read it. And how do you guys manage that at your own office? Inevitably, you're using these type of systems.
So I think that I do agree with you that over the last 10 years, as technology has essentially become so much more pervasive in our lives, one of the big questions that I think is interesting for me is, why is it that we still have not really seen the kind of productivity gains that we would expect to see in our society at large?
So you don't think we've seen them?
Well, actually, I mean, if you look at the latest statistics, 60% of our time as a knowledge worker is spent doing work about work. It's spent essentially communicating, writing email, searching for information. So I think
not actually creating the product, just doing the work to maybe create the product. So I think that the question that we ask ourselves is like, what are the modern sets of software, tools, and capabilities that we need to build such that we'll actually unlock real productivity? And I think a good example of a product that's enabling that at Dropbox itself is called Dropbox Paper, which has really fundamentally changed the way that we plan and we communicate across the company, because it's way less about essentially writing emails or sending I know
IM messages.
Dropbox Paper, but if somebody doesn't know it in the audience, do you want to explain?
Dropbox Paper is essentially a new product that's an interesting hybrid between a word processor, a wiki, and a communication solution. And it really allows you to essentially collaboratively create real-time documents and also get feedback on them in really quick feedback loops.
It's like Wikipedia meets Microsoft Word.
That's actually not a bad description. And it has fundamentally changed the way that we do collaboration within the company, because as a great example, I probably have 2 or 3x less email than I did, essentially 5 years ago, because most of my communication loops are within Dropbox Paper itself. I'm curious to hear what's your take on that.
Yeah, no, I think that the way work is completely changing, and it's absolutely true that these devices can be complete distractions. We haven't figured out how to manage them. I think that's a real opportunity. It's an opportunity for things like machine learning to enable us to prioritize our time better. There's no tool that we have today that tells me when I wake up, what emails do I really need to read right now, what can wait, what changed overnight. There's a lot of opportunity to drive real productivity gains reduce the amount of time that's spent managing the work and enable people to actually do the work.
We don't have much time left, but I can't have you guys on stage and not ask about the IPO. Some people thought you might do it in 2016. 2016 was really a bad year for tech IPOs. There was a lot of pressure in 2015, and then we saw the pressure come off. People were worried that the actual market valuation in stock would not match what the private market valuation was. Are you guys going to IPO?
So first of all, we don't need the cash.
No? That must be nice.
We're
That
funded,
is nice.
at this point, we're cash flow positive, generating quite a bit of cash every day. And
Are you
just
profitable?
We've not talked about profitability yet. The first step is generating free cash, and then you worry about getting profitable.
Got it.
But that means that we don't need to raise money if we don't want to. So we'll, as Drew, our CEO, has talked about, the first step to building a great public company is building a great company. And that's what we've been spending our time on last year. That's what we're spending on time on this year.
So there will be an IPO at some point?
There are absolutely benefits to being public at some point in time, and we've never said no.
You don't feel that pressure right now?
We're putting money into the bank every day.
Perfect. Guys, thank you very much. It's been great talking with you.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.